difference, it also highlights that we were right to focus on outdoor irrigation as the big difference in water use, right?
Yep. Yeah. We will be posting the presentation on our website with all the data as well. So,
right.
And we see very good interesting experiences of how outside parties are actually using our information. Sorry. So when we look at by hydrologic region, we still see that the South Coast is the larger user of water, basically, compared to all the other regions. It's by far the largest region, the South Coast. And we actually here comparing the percentage reduction in the month of October of 2014 compared to the month of October 2013. Previously, we saw that South Coast was saving 6.5%, now it's going to 1.4%. The rest of the regions remain, the percentage of water conservation remains fairly even, pretty much the same with little fluctuations. But the biggest difference, and you will see in the overall percentage, is the South Coast. So here's the trend of water conservation savings. We went in June 14 from 4.3, we peaked at 11.6 in August 2014, and now we've seen a decline of 6.7%. And that's mostly due to the impact of the South Coast on the overall average. This is the average percentage reduction.
What if you were to take South Coast out? What if
No,
you were to
good
take
question.
South Coast out, just to get an idea of how the rest of the state's doing?
So
question.
to give you an idea, yeah, it will be around 10% or even higher. I mean, I can, in the previous slide, I'm showing you the percentage reduction by hydrologic region. So you can see all of the others are about that average. That, we see North Coast is 22%, San Francisco Bay is 15.5%, Sacramento River is 8.6%. But South Coast is 56% of the overall production.
Right. And are you going to get to some of the, I couldn't open it on my iPad this morning, I'm sorry. You're going to get to some of the reasons. I mean, one of the things that I'm going to want to talk about a little bit, I mean, I went through the numbers for each community, and it raises more questions than answers. It's like all over the lot. So at first it was like, well, maybe it was hotter in South Coast, cooler in other places, so people worry about their yards and water a little bit more. But there were some places that went up. It's not just the reduction went down, it went up. And then other places maintained their reduction or did better. So it's a very perplexing picture.
Yeah, we need to look at those cases individually. So here, this pie actually shows that the weight of the South Coast on the overall water use in California, and that's kind of the focus for us will be to analyze, what's happening in South Coast.
So, in terms of reasons for the decline, the bottom line is we don't really have the data to know exactly why we've seen a decline, other than we do know that, as Rafa pointed out, that the South Coast is weighing. That's just math, though. Some possible reasons, likely reasons, are listed here. One, this notion of conservation fatigue. Just over time, the message is getting blurred a little bit, and people just are kind of falling back into old ways, not being as diligent with their watering and conservation maybe as they were initially during the summer, where it was more obvious to some people that we were in a drought. Chair Marcus, you mentioned just lower outdoor water use. As we move into the cooler fall months, the proportion of per capita water use the proportion of outdoor water use is going down, and indoor water use is going up. And there's just, with less outdoor water use, there's just less opportunity to save water outside, and the thrust of our regulation is really focused on outdoor water use saving. So it's not completely unexpected that there's a decline for that reason. And then again, you also alluded to Southern California weather, and then there's probably a number of other reasons that we just don't know because the data, we just don't have that level of data to
Yeah, we have
determine.
to go anecdotally. What I know obviously this month we're having rains which may yield some people thinking that we're out of the drought, which we aren't. Did it rain at all in October?
So this
It rained a little, right?
next slide gets at that question. So there's two maps,
Oh, thank you.
and it's really pretty interesting. The map on the left is precipitation. The map on the right is temperature. The blue bars are this year, and the orange bars are last year. October only for 2013 is orange, 2014 is blue. And these are just select cities. This is not, a comprehensive analysis, but it is telling. What you see is in Northern California, last year, very low to almost no rainfall, whereas this year we've received some October rainfall. And the trend actually reverses itself in Southern California, which does lend itself to the idea that, Southern California water conservation for October was lower compared to, or water use was lower or higher compared to last year, just because last year looks like they had some rain, whereas this year in October, it looks like they either had none or very little rain. And then on the right map, temperature, for most of the state, I think with the exception of Fresno, temperatures did increase, which is another possible reason for more water use in October this year compared to last year. As you mentioned, though, the results are all over the map. Some districts within the South Coast are doing well, and some aren't. And the weather would affect everybody, not
Equally.
perfectly equally, but would generally equally.
Well, and the Bay Area maintained a pretty good percentage reduction, and they had high temperatures too. So there's something
Right, and-
mindset going on there. I
Right,
think,
and
too.
also the scale on precipitation should be noted that even though the blue bars are higher in the northern part of the state, that's not very much rain.
Right.
There's only a few inches of rain. So
Yeah,
it's almost minuscule. So that big blue bar that's shown in the northern part of the state for rain is actually a little misleading because of the scale of the y-axis.
Is it? I think it's like 4 or 5 inches for October.
For
Yeah.
Eureka, and that was and North Coast had the highest percent reduction compared to 2013 of any region.
Right.
So I just point out that the blue bars are a little misleading on their size because that's not that much rain.
Did you have a question, Fran?
Not a question, but I guess it is. And it's to you as well as to and to staff who are engaged with the drought folks. Have they posted big, wide banner letters saying "Turn off your sprinklers" now? Because that is really, when it starts to rain, just turn them off. That's going to help a whole lot, and we're going to have a uniform, united, loud. Statement on that front.
Well, that leads me to say what I should have said several times already. SaveOurWater.com.
Well, it's certainly on SaveOurWater.com, but on our website,
Yeah, it
when
should be
people
everywhere,
go
I
to
agree.
our website to get this great information, at the top there should be some
good
kind of a banner that says "Turn off your sprinklers."
Well, and maybe also it's raining, but the drought's not over,
Right,
because people are confused by that.
right. That's a good point. Jonathan, will you call your friends at Caltrans and get them to change their messaging? Thank you. No, I think that's important. The messaging part is really difficult because unless you get free media, it ends up being very expensive. And the budget, even for SaveOurWater.com, is a fraction of what local water agencies are doing. And at least, Lawn Dude, aren't they trying to do They did 2 more all over Southern California. Well, he has to kick it in gear, Lawn Dude. What's up, Lawn Dude? Would be my question. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good point about the turning off sprinklers, and we can add a banner to the website where this information is. And anecdotally, just poking around on other, suppliers' websites looking for information as we have, I haven't really noticed that type of really front and center banner that alerts people to do that. So it's a good recommendation for us, but also for the water suppliers. So moving in just to the per capita water use data, similar to last month. Again, last month being the first month it was collected. It's really variable. It ranges from higher than 500 gallons per person per day to less than 50 gallons per person per day. There's, a number of reasons for that. The average for October 2014 was 109 gallons per person per day, which was down from last year in October, which was 117. As a reminder, 55 is the performance standard for indoor use, so our average is, roughly right now half of the 55
It's still
standard.
outdoors, even with the campaign.
Yeah, there's likely still outdoor, water use occurring even with the cooling temperatures, a significant outdoor, which is, again, not surprising.
Could you remind the folks on the web and me where the performance standard comes from?
It's in the water code. I forget the specific citation to it. I don't know if anyone else
It's
recalls.
also the drinking water program, basic health and sanitation, the 55, that's why we used it in the
Good.
orders.
Yeah. It's in the code.
Yeah.
There's also a code for outdoor water use. There's a number for outdoor water use. It has escaped me right now, but it's in the model ordinance for outdoor landscape, for urban outdoor landscape, not for ag.
Right, and that varies by area and evapotranspiration, or just by per acre, or how does it, what's the metric?
I think I'm not sure, but I think it's expressed as a percentage of evapotranspiration. Yeah.
Okay.
So it would depend on your, where you are and your lot size and that type of thing. And then, the last point, and perhaps the most important here, is that, when we see areas and we see suppliers that are exhibiting a low percentage reduction, so low conservation percentages, 1%, 2%, or even negative, they're going backwards, they're using more water this year, combined with high per capita water use data or numbers, these are areas that, kind of raise questions about what's going on here, and there are potential areas we think that additional focus could be placed on. Again, if they're high per capita water use numbers, there's probably a lot of outdoor water use occurring in those areas. They're probably ripe for conservation reduction, but if they're not showing high levels of conservation reduction, it kind of begs the question, why not? Is there more that can be done there?
Right, and so when we talk next month, part of the issue is going to be, do we do more across the board, or should we be this month? It's December. Should we target more specifically? As I look through the numbers, part of what struck me is exactly that, because you do have some places that have really high percentage reductions, but they still have high gallons per capita. And so, you want to give them a medal, but you want to give them encouragement. They get the ribbon without the medal, I don't know, whatever, because you want to give positive reinforcement. But the folks that have high numbers and a low percentage, you wonder if they're trying to do anything or not, and they may be complying, but their first level of drought contingency planning that has outdoor irrigation has a really modest mandatory thing, and we tried not to pierce that because we wanted to rely on them.
Yeah, really, that the locals had an urban water management plan that they're going to implement, and like you say, maybe that drought contingency plan, now that it's been field tested,
Not so robust.
not as robust as it could be.
So now we are tracking basically three data, the data points. We are tracking the percentage reduction, we're tracking the production, and we're also tracking the gallons per capita day. And as Eric mentioned before, we see a significant range between 50 gallons per capita day to 500 gallons per capita day. So we try to organize this by hydrologic regions, and we saw that when you order them basically on the average gallons per capita day, North Coast, the average on that region, the communities in that region use 71.2 gallons per capita day compared to the Colorado River that goes to 211. What's interesting about this graph is that if you notice the four first regions on the left, they are all South Coast regions. So South Coast in general is using less gallons per capita day than the inland regions.
Oh, urban, yeah,
Yeah,
because, it's coastal and it's
Coastal.
cooler, but
Correct,
also
but
they've been conserving longer.
Which makes sense, but so we can start grouping them
This
by,
is good.
it's not just north and south, but it's coastal and inland. We also see that the coastal regions, with the exception of the South Coast, actually have a higher percentage reduction. South Coast being the exception, and the Sacramento River region also being the exception. So we are working on different ways of analyzing and presenting the data. So we use this balloon chart to
I
show.
prefer to think of them as Christmas ornaments.
Yeah,
just
it's
for the
Christmas.
holiday season.
Christmas.
I like, they look like planetary.
So
Jupiter.
the size of the balloons, I need to explain this a little bit. I mean, the size of the balloons is the water production. So it tells you know how big the hydrologic region is in terms of using water. Then on the left axis, we have the percentage reduction. So the higher the balloon, the better performance in terms of savings compared to last year. And on the horizontal axis, we are showing the gallons per capita day. So on the farther on the right, it will be using more water than the ones on the left. You may notice that the ones at the bottom right corner will be the regions who are actually performing the worst. They're not only not saving water, they have a high gallons per capita day consumption. The red dot lines shows the average for each one of those two categories. We've done this graph for every individual water supplier. And it's very interesting to see dynamically how it moves, over time, so how things are changing and moving. But we are not prepared to show this to you today, but
That's interesting.
we are testing.
That's great.
This is a nice graphic display of information, and I've seen this in other realms in terms of population and per capita income on different countries of the world, and then you can animate it, and it shows, going from back to 1960 to the present, how demographics have changed. So we could use a similar kind of graphic interface here to see, you can make it animated through time to see how it can float around and move.
Yeah, Rafa's actually been working on those animations already. It gets really busy when you have a lot of information up there, but
Like a galaxy.
Yeah,
what-
it's like a galaxy, right? If you can get it to swirl, just so that. would be good.
I'm wondering if you could tailor the results to water districts. So getting back to the earlier slides where, you show that there's, higher gallons per day, trying to get a message in a positive way, so that maybe we wouldn't have to be more prescriptive, and helping regions to understand their place as being outliers.
yeah, I think that's a great point. I mentioned we need to look at the areas that basically are doing poorly and figure out why they are. And I think what I'm hearing you say is we should, and I agree, we should also look at the areas that are doing very well and learn from them and figure out what's working.
Exactly.
Right, but in terms of the areas that are doing poorly, they may have some anecdotal reason why it just doesn't work. But if we could, I liken it to the, the utility, to the behavioral efficiencies that we've been talking about. You put yourself compared to others.
Like the smart meters, but
yeah,
do it district by district.
For individual homeowners, but what about for districts? Something similar where you could take these things into account and have, bubbles for water districts, so that it takes all these different factors into account, which may help them to focus on it in a more analytical way, as opposed to having some anecdotal reason, it was just too hot. One factor.
And this gets to the peer pressure. I mean, basically, people, water districts in particular, water supply districts in particular, are very protective of the fact that they operate well. And they like to brag about it, and they like to, and they, many of them do. So this kind of feedback would be, I think, helpful, and they might actually take it to heart.
Well, don't you post, I mean, I have the detailed stuff that you're working from, but what's the nature of the spreadsheet we post? Do we post it by region too?
We don't, we just
If we posted the data by region, you have the data. I was circling things to say, why is Irvine up? What is compared to LA is like at 1.4, still down or something, but only 1.4s. But there's a difference between them that temperature can't explain. But we could just give that to them, and we have the data.
We have the data. We have not as of yet posted it by region or even included the hydrologic region for each supplier as a data point. Part of the reason we didn't do that because we're trying to post as close to raw information with some calculations that we disclose as much as possible. Attaching the hydrologic region is something we had to do. It's not data that we collected, but there's no problem with doing it. That was just the reason why we hadn't included it as of now. We can definitely include hydrologic region, post it by hydrologic region. We can do an analysis.
Or we could just send it to key folks that are outliers and say, here you go, explain this.
Yeah.
I don't know. Think of how you want to do it.
Okay.
Chair Marcus, also to mention, and Eric, you can provide me with the name of the organization that posted not too long ago a compilation of the data that we have been preparing in map form.
Oh,
And it provides kind of a color-coded view of a region and where the water suppliers are relative to each other in terms of their conservation results.
does it
Or
have
was it
conservation
GP
results and
It may have been
GCP?
GPCD.
GPCD? You'd need to have both really to
Right.
have a picture. I like this graph because it has all three. And or that other graph too had all three. I think that's great.
Right. Yeah, so that was the Pacific Institute that's got
Oh,
it's
I
an
didn't know that.
online map, and you can zoom in and out by, type. It's like a Google map, but it's got each individual water district color coded by, it's just per capita water use. But like red is areas where it's high and green's areas where it's low. Of course, we've in the past, talked about making those types of comparisons and being careful that
Yeah,
you
you have
take
to be careful.
into consideration a lot of different factors that
Right.
influence per capita
Right.
water use. But they did do a nice job with it. So sticking
Thank you.
with tradition, we have highlighted a handful of folks who are doing really well. Certainly not everyone, just selected a grouping example of suppliers that are doing well from different areas throughout the state. And so the list, the bullets on the left side, these are a selection of larger water suppliers that are realizing pretty high levels of conservation, generally above 20%, with the exception of Santa Rosa, which is at 17%, still quite good and higher than much higher than the state average. This is for October. If you add up all the suppliers on the left, that's over 1 million. It's suppliers serving over 1 million people with an average conservation of over 20%. So it is being accomplished in some areas, some relatively sizable areas, and it can be done. On the right are just suppliers where we're seeing really high percent reduction in water use combined with relatively or very low per capita water use. So we've got, again,
And the Davis numbers are down from where they were, because they were higher than I thought they would be
Who's
earlier
that?
in the year. Davis.
Davis,
Down to 80 is good.
down to 80, right? That's, low
Thank you, Barbara. I
considering.
know you led that, of course.
And the percent conservation is also high.
Maybe Tom did, sorry.
So just a sampling, like I said, these are definitely, there were others as well, and then there were just as many who didn't do as well. Just moving into sort of some near-term next steps, recognizing that we are going to be having the workshop on the 17th, where we'll be looking at longer-term actions and getting input and ideas there. We've already talked about this quite a bit, but we need to start digging into the data deeper and basically determining, trying to use it to figure out what's working and what's not, and learn from the suppliers who are doing a really good job, and additionally, investigate the suppliers who, we'd like to see better results from and why that might be occurring. Related to that, we talk about mandatory restrictions. One thing we found throughout this process the regulations were designed with a lot of flexibility in mind, where each supplier implements their own plan. The common denominator is mandatory restriction on outdoor water use. But what we've learned is that means a lot of different things.
Right.
So, taking the data to the next step, trying to figure out the suppliers who have just implemented time of day restrictions, like you can't water at night, compared to the ones who say you can only water 2 days a week and you can only water 15 minutes per station. It would be, we think, useful to look at the data on what they're achieving in context with what they're requiring, to see if we can tease anything out of that and get an idea of the effectiveness of different actions. It takes work, and it's been, having these monthly updates like this is a lot of work in and of itself just to get it together. So
Right.
we haven't taken that extra step. That's something we like to do when we feel it would have value moving into next summer. Outreach is also, another area where we're looking to improve efforts on, especially with some of the underperforming suppliers. Again, these are the bubbles that we showed on that chart with, low or high water use and low percentage reduction. And then
But perhaps
lastly,
not the teeny bubbles, because that's probably not necessarily worth the time.
right. Yeah, also looking at size.
Yeah.
So where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, focus on the largest suppliers.
Or where the vulnerability may be in the future. So North Lahontan, not so vulnerable. So does
Right.
it really matter in their region so much? Not really.
Right, agree. And then, just increased communication and targeted communication, we think could have some positive results. For example, working with like landscape organizations.
Oh, that's good.
So we get the message out to those folks. A banner on the website, maybe a combination of the two, where we talk to landscape organizations and make sure that, all of their membership is aware you need to be turning down your sprinkler timers, because they tend to be the ones that are adjusting homeowners' timers. In fact, talking to one water supplier, a large one in Southern California, they indicated at commercial properties, they tend to do better moving into the fall because those tend to have smart controllers or weather-based controllers.
Right.
And the residential ones don't. So there tends to be a lag in the savings as we move into the rainy season.
Well, I suspect you'll also have an issue, not to complicate it further, but so for example, I was down in San Diego last week, and their numbers aren't good. It's like, what's up, San Diego? But their mayor stepped up, their council stepped up, and they went to stage 3. And so now they're going to have much more dramatic restrictions starting November 1st. So hopefully the November numbers for San Diego will show, if it works, will show considerable reduction. So they've taken the action we would probably push them to take.
Right.
So.
And this has been mentioned several times today, but you will be holding a workshop December 17th in Los Angeles. It's going to be at the Metropolitan Water District offices. And, basically, from a staff perspective, it will be a good opportunity to get inputs for the board on, what next actions that you should consider taking if the drought continues, if it gets worse. And there's a series of questions that we thought would be useful to get input on from different stakeholders, and we'll have some panelists there as well. But, what more can be done, not just by this board, but by local water suppliers?
Okay.
What additional requirements could you consider? What additional data? And just as importantly, how would we use that data? What else could we collect, and would it be useful? And, how we might be able to compel better performance in some of the underperforming areas. And there's, likely other questions we could add to the mix that have come up today. And
One question I have, and this is really for Carlos, I think it would be helpful to know what the authorities are if we are going to try to move into a more normal rainfall pattern in the short term. What kinds of things? What authorities do we have that we could use to ensure that we don't lose what we've gained under this emergency?
So certainly there are a couple of options. We can certainly explore the possibility of making these regulations permanent, and I'd be happy to put something together for the board, either at the workshop or during briefings, to flesh out what that might look like. Of course, 1058.5 allows these particular regulations to be renewed for up to another 270 days, and those renewals can continue indefinitely for the life of the drought, which is measured in one of several ways, one of which is as long as the governor's proclamation remains in effect. Another is simply rainfall measures when we have more critically dry years followed by one or more below normal dry or critically dry years. So we'll certainly be happy to put together something on that to further flesh out the options.
Great, yeah, there's a whole portfolio of things to think about. I mean, it keeps getting more complicated, of course, each month, but that's the nature of things in terms of this. And I really appreciate your incredible ability to do graphic representations. That really does help a lot. But as we get more into the details, it just becomes more challenging. And also figuring out what do we do across the board versus what do we do in targeted ways. You know, where do our waste and unreasonable use authorities play in as maybe the tool we've used in past droughts, and maybe it's a more targeted tool, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
And one other thought, Kamiar was here earlier. I don't know if you listened to him on the web, but he was saying that they were setting a target in the California Water Plan for by 2030 to maintain 2020 levels. That's a target. Is it an aggressive target? Is it something, is it kind of a ho-hum target? I don't know. And so at some point in the next several months, I'd like to hear from you, based on the numbers that you're seeing here, what that really means. Because setting a target is very important. We tend to respond to targets, but as a state. But I want to make sure we set a target that's worthy of us.
Yeah, we can circle back with Kamiar and get a better feel for what that means. I heard him say that it equates to a 30%
Right.
reduction.
Right,
So,
because it'll be accommodating population growth.
right, right. So that's all we have. I guess in closing, I would just echo some of the remarks that you've all made, in that, you know, the rain is great. It's a good opportunity for people to turn off their sprinklers. However, the drought's far from over, and it's not time to relax with our conservation efforts. We would have definitely liked to seen better than 6.7% than we saw this month. So, you know, water suppliers and individuals, we all need to be vigilant and continue with our efforts.
I'd like to just follow up on Board Member Spivey Weber's comment. We're in an emergency, so we're just doing the best we can. But I do like the idea of long-term planning, you know, looking at what we've done as a state with greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, planning, you know, in 2 phases, 2020 and then all the way out to 2050, as to what we think is doable, waste reduction targets. So I think long-term planning is something we should be looking at, not picking something out, as you say, but having some analysis as to what's doable. And along those lines, I keep looking for Tuolumne County Utilities District, because on the list of kudos, I was there about a month and a half ago, and they say they're at 42% reduction, and I know you can only pick, you know, here and there, but it'd be great to see if you could confirm the information that they gave me. I just looked on their website, and they are aiming for conservation reduction, you know, reduction levels at 50%.
Wow, well, they're down 23.5%, and they're down to 108 GPCD. That's pretty good.
Remember, their water supply was severely compromised this year, so they were one of those communities that had to take dramatic steps. I'd also like to just follow on your comment there briefly, that the state does have an ongoing 20 by 2020 effort, long-range planning effort, in order to achieve conservation. And so we can also bring you more information on the progress that's being made on those longer-term horizons.
You know, good comments on the long-range importance of this, and now that we have a system in place to collect information that makes a lot more sense to everyone in the state. So those are important points. I guess I'd like to circle back a little bit to when we adopted the regulations, and we had a discussion on enforcement and how to go about that, you know, and there was a lot of concern that there'd be, toxic water waster tickets going out and that sort of thing. Well, that sort of died down, and in terms of explaining the disappointing 6.7% reduction in October, it's been 2 weeks. I've been thinking about it, trying to explain away in my mind why South Coast fell off on the reduction. We looked at temperature, but like you say, it's not a whole picture. There's many stories within that, very complicated. I think now we are at a point where the dry season's over, the rainy season begins, and we can give pause and maybe not look, since you have limited time, I encourage what you were talking about in terms of looking at the mandatory measures in place and doing a little bit of fine analysis and not getting too bogged down with the summaries as we go through the winter months. I think it would be worthwhile to look at what's working, at specific locations and feeding back. And then, again, circling back to the issue of enforcement, I don't want to oversimplify, but if there isn't any consequence to not following through with commitments, then human nature is not to necessarily go the extra mile on the voluntary.
Just because they want it to be fair across the board, not because they're scofflaws.
That's right. It's not. It's just. It's part of our nature. So there has to be some measure of consequence, I think. In terms of looking at this, and I know we're going to get into that at our next meeting.
That's a good question.
So
that could decide. It'd be interesting if that was one of the dividing or the determining.
Yeah, if there's some kind of consequence. But remember, we had a mechanism for folks to report on their enforcement. And, I'd be interested. I realize that's anecdotal. It's going to be all over the map. But to the extent that enforcement actions have been taken, has that had any influence on performance? So just thought I'd bring that up.
And just one follow-up. We did include that voluntary field where people could report on their enforcement, and that is also posted with the data. That's part of the raw data. And I've scanned that recently, and there aren't many suppliers who have taken that opportunity, but there are some. And when I looked at their responses, I was actually kind of surprised with how much they were doing. We went out to 50 properties, we issued 40 letters, followed up with 13. I'm making these numbers up, obviously, but the ones who actually responded had done quite a bit.
Great. Well, more on this. It's really great work, and I know how hard you're all working. And just thank you, doing an excellent job, and we really appreciate it. Great, thank you very much. Item number 6. Item number 6, as they come up, it's a pretty exciting item, I think. Just some big changes in the law that give us some resources to really be able to do some things we haven't been able to do. I think it's may have gotten a little bit lost in all the excitement over the bond and groundwater legislation, but this may well be also in the most significant legislative changes, and it directs us to do a number of things, and this hearing today is a piece of that. Hello all. Do you want to introduce Tom, or should I just turn it over to Lisa and Darren? Three Mills, of course, sounds like a place rather than a...
I thought it was an
This
address.
is not a curtailment presentation.
I have a little bit of a cold. Oh, that was on.
Yeah, and keep it
It's on.
close, because you have a soft voice.
I'll get really close. Okay.
We've got cards on this. Oh, I meant to ask about cards on the last one. We didn't have cards. We did have an interesting comment, though, from Mrs. Edelman on the last one with a concern about some of the conservation being too light, and we talked about that a little bit, so that I found that helpful.
But just to point out, the case that she was citing, they are a water wholesaler, not a water retailer.
That's right, and we just did it to water retailers. That's right. Thank you. Good point.
Okay.
Great, take it away. Sorry.
So, good morning. Can you hear me? I can't.
You got to
Get
get
really
close.
close.
You got to pretend
I've
you're a
done
rock
that.
star.
Oh, wow. Okay, this is good. Okay, so I apologize. I have a bit of a cold today, but I have water, so we'll see if my voice keeps going. So I am Lisa Babcock, Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Fund Manager. This is an informational item for public comment required by the newly enacted SB 445, so there's no board action necessary regarding this item. SB 445, let's see if I do this right. Okay. Was an urgency measure that took effect on September 25th when it was signed. It extends the underground storage tank cleanup fund to by 10 years to January 1st of 2026. It does a number of things, and I'm only going to talk about the ones that are relevant to this topic regarding the 3 mills. It does requires removal of all single wall tanks within 10 years. It dedicates 3 mills of the petroleum storage fee, which is estimated to generate about $39.5 million annually for 3 purposes. And the purpose of this information item is to get public input on people's perspective on how much money needs to go into those 3 purposes.
Right.
So first is additional funds for the rust loans and grants for UST removal, replacement, or upgrade. Additional funds for reimbursement of UST corrective action at schools that are eligible for the UST cleanup fund, and a new site cleanup subaccount. So to prepare stakeholders and ourselves for this information item, we held 5 stakeholder meetings in November. We met with representatives of local environmental agencies, oil industry representatives and consultants, school districts, disadvantaged communities, and water agencies. The law requires that annually we hold an annual information item for public comment at the state board meeting before determining how the 3 mills will be allocated. Since the governor's budget's coming out on January 10th, we figured we'd comply with the law. This information item is being presented today as well as December 16th in Southern California at the board meeting. In addition to the stakeholder process and public comments at this board meeting and December 16th board meeting, there's opportunity for stakeholder input in the state budget process, which
And the way that's manifest then is in our advice to the administration, which is not a public thing. It just comes out in the administration. So in many regards, we're doing a public hearing or a public meeting information item to bring in information, not for us as a board to make a decision, but to be able to facilitate input to you all in that budget process. And we could weigh in individually in talking with you about it.
Right.
Okay.
And in a way, because we're so far into the budget process this year, this informs the board for the following budget process as well, for the
Right, 'cause it'll
16,
take a while to
17.
build up this money into actually being something this year. Okay.
So,
Yeah, because there won't be 39 million at the beginning of the year, right?
no,
How much will come in it?
We
It'll be
think-
by the end of the year.
so by the end of this fiscal year, by July
Right.
1st, we anticipate there will be about 10 million.
Okay, thanks.
And then, quarterly, then about 10 million each quarter. Yes, with the state budget process, then the governor's budget comes out in January. There are legislative hearings of subcommittees of the budget committee, which
Great.
are
So people
opportunities
will
for,
have an opportunity to speak there as well. Okay,
Right.
great. Great.
and then the legislature adopts the budget.
Good.
So again, the purposes are additional funds for rust loans and grants for UST removal, replacement, or upgrade, which is the rust program, and the fund is PUSTFA, P-U-S-T-F-A. Additional funds for reimbursement of school districts in the cleanup fund, which is the school district account, and then the new site cleanup subaccount. Okay, I fail. Okay. The RUST program provides loans and grants to help small businesses that meet certain criteria. Only up to 25% is allowed for grants. The balance is loans. SB 445 increased the grant cap from $50,000 per facility to $70,000 per facility. It also provides that if there is no other gas station within 15 miles, the grant can be up to $140,000. So in case by pulling the tank, the gas station would otherwise go out of business.
You don't want people to run out of gas.
Right. Also, after a loan is repaid, then a person can apply for a new loan. The RUST program is funded by loan repayments, interest, and fees currently. So the more that money that's loaned, the more that's repaid, the less will in the future be needed from the 3 mills, and we can, it's pretty impressive, the loan repayment opportunities. Historically, there have been occasional appropriations. When the program came back to the board in 2004, with $5.5 million, there was $8 million added then in 2009 and 2013, where the demand was greater than the loan repayments. Currently, the balance is $12.5 million. The average annual loan repayment amount is about $4 million, and the funds requested is about $7 million. So because of SB 445, we expect increased demand for RUST loans and grants because of expanded eligibility requirements, the increase in the cap, and the requirement to remove single-walled tanks in 10 years. The challenge for all of these estimations for how much money is needed for the 3 mills is that we don't know the number of new applications that will be coming in. There's not a great inventory on single-wall tanks right now, but there are efforts now initiated to come up with better numbers by local agencies now with this new requirement. And we don't know the rate of application submittal. A lot of people wait till the end, but all of our programs are trying to get the message out with just about everything, every email, everything we can to get people to realize there's a deadline. The school district account is for schools with claims in the underground storage tank cleanup fund. Helps school districts pay for eligible corrective action costs at USTs that have leaked, regardless of the priority of the claim in the priority list. The schools program has been funded by 3 annual appropriations of $10 million each, and currently the average annual requested funds are about $3.5 million, and the slide is incorrect. The balance is $11 million in the fund. 11 million?
It says 4 million there.
Right, the slide's incorrect.
Oh.
So it should say 11.
So is that keeping up with demand?
Yes.
The 3.5?
Yes. In fact, if at this rate, we're anticipating that there would not be additional funds needed for the school district account for another 2 or 3 years. So again, we don't know if there will be a change in the rate of applications of eligible claims against the fund from schools, but with the extension of the fund by 10 years and renewed outreach to schools and new players in that effort, who I think you'll hear from today, we anticipate there may be additional draw on the fund eventually over time.
Do we know how many schools have underground storage tanks? Just like the other one, like the Rust, we don't know. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Since it's not their business, it's really quite a challenge. Okay. So the site cleanup sub-account is new. We are taking liberties to try to drop the S on the sub-account so that we can get good acronyms. So we're calling, that's what I do. So we're going to call this the Site Cleanup Account Program, SCAP. Okay, all right. Just getting you all primed up for this. So SB 445 allows the state board to expend funds allocated to the site cleanup subaccount for state operations and for grants program. SB 445 is the only contains criteria regarding the grants program. There isn't anything that has been adopted by the board at this point in time, since the law is only about 2 months old. But it lays out a flexible program to address anthropogenic state surface water and groundwater contamination, regardless of the source of contamination. So it's for the investigation. Oops.
That everybody hearing the note. No, I was just saying that it's an area where our hands are tied and our tools are few, so it's very welcome.
So the purpose is for the investigation and remediation of the harm to human health, safety, and the environment caused by surface water or groundwater contamination, which is very broad. The state operations piece of it is that the state can pay for state and regional board and certified LOP expenditures to identify the source and remediate surface or groundwater contamination, which could include contracts. Oh. Is that it? Okay. Did it change?
Here we go.
Oh, thanks. It also provides for grants for remediation. It requires that the responsible parties lack sufficient financial resources to pay for the required response actions. Also that there's a directive or from the state or regional board to make something happen. It also requires that the state board consider 5 things. The degree to which human health, safety, or the environment are threatened, which, you know, how bad is it criterion. Whether the location is in a small or financially disadvantaged community. The cost or potential environmental benefit of the investigation or cleanup, which I call bang for the buck, or is it just a drop in the bucket? Whether there are other potential sources of funding for the investigation or cleanup, which is a significant difference from many other programs. Any other information the board identifies as necessary for consideration. Oops. I want to, but I actually want to go back a second. So this is really a unique program for small projects, for projects where the grantee is not a public agency or a nonprofit or a mutual water company, which is, I guess, now in Prop 1. So where there are really no other funding sources. So some of the details, The site cleanup sub-account can only pay for reasonable costs. It cannot pay for costs for which an applicant is paid by another source. It can bar an applicant who makes a misrepresentation or false claim, and the board has the discretion to request cost recovery in an actual civil action. SB 445 requires that the board annually, at least annually, adopt a list of applicants to be awarded grants, and that the board specify grant application information. It allows the board to adopt procedures and if so, post them on the web. So we're calling the grants piece of this SCAG, Site Cleanup Sub-Account Grants. So who can apply is actually anyone whose projects meet the grant criteria. So I don't really have estimates of the demand, but we can anticipate that it could be high. So I pulled together published numbers. You know,
It says that we may publish, but we're planning to, I assume, at some point.
at some point in time, probably. But, you know, for the first several months, we'll probably be just seeing what comes in, start getting our feet wet.
Okay.
What I did not say earlier is that during the stakeholder group meetings, we had to try and inform people about the site cleanup sub-account without really having put in any additional parameters. And anything that we did that's uniform, we would have to do in regulations. So what we will be doing is starting in the first of the year, having focused stakeholder work groups, focused input on getting the grant application put together, et cetera. And we plan to get this program moving as quickly as we can. And that's the end of my comments.
Questions?
Now, what is it that you want to hear from us? Do you want to hear do you want us to wait until after the next presentation, which will be in Los Angeles in a couple of weeks? And then what kind of questions do you want us to be answering, if any?
Yeah, so today, basically, we're just here to take public comment. We're going to have to work, obviously, to develop the program, and so we're going to have plenty of opportunity for you to give us guidance as we pull together a program. But today, it's just kind of listening to the stakeholders on kind of how they'd like to allocate out funds, their thoughts on the split, because that's kind of the question of the moment, is how to split the $39.5 million amongst the different categories that's eligible for it. And just kind of reminder that it's an annual decision, right? So it's not like we're deciding once and for all. People should, take it with a grain of salt. We're walking into this with a limited bit of information. We're going to learn a bunch this first year, I'm sure, and we'll come back again next year and ask them a question again, give them more information, and kind of repeat the cycle. So yeah, today. I don't have to put you on the spot. You don't have to jump right now.
Great. Other questions before we hear from the public? All right, let's move right into that. First, we have Eric Holm from SWRCB, followed by Ian Padilla.
Is this all right? We're good
Yeah, you
here.
got it.
Okay. Members of the State Water Board, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak today. Yes, my name is Eric Holm, and I'm a professional geologist with the Antea Group here in the Sacramento area. And Jay McKeeman was scheduled to come and talk, but was unable to attend at this meeting, so he requested that I present the comments on the behalf of SWRCB, which contains approximately 400 members of the California Independent Oil Marketers Association. So they have their own acronym also. So. The following comments and observations are provided for the board's consideration in establishing the allocation of the 3 mills portion of the 2 cent per gallon underground storage tank revenues for the three primary purposes that have already been established. And I won't go through those again. It'll allow me to cut here a little bit. But of that estimated approximately $4 million per year in revenues for those three purposes, SWRCB would strongly recommend that the lion's share, or 90% of the available 3 mills revenue, be allocated to the financial assistance for the single-wall tanks, or basically, as denoted earlier, as the RUST program. And the reasons provided are that the universe of single-wall tanks is currently ill-defined, as Ms. Babcock mentioned. It could be as high as 2,000 locations. It's not known how many single-wall tanks then exist at each one of these locations. And so the demand for the financial assistance may be large, especially if there are requests for loans to replace the tanks rather than merely remove the tanks. Point two is it's not known whether the sites once examined will need further remediation work. However, history has indicated that many of these sites will require additional investigation and remediation since they are single-wall tanks. It's not known whether such sites are owned by financially impaired owners, though this is likely, hence the demand on the grants and the loan program. It's not known whether such sites provide unique and/or critical fuel supply locations, which would require tank replacement rather than mere removal, which was also mentioned by Ms. Babcock and asked here about areas that are in the remote areas in which a service station could be removed from and which would put hardship on the local communities. The expense of replacing such tanks with modern facilities can easily run into the high 6 figures or low 7 figures cost, especially if tanks are located in difficult to access locations on a site. And finally, using the above-ground storage tanks is also an expensive proposition, since new above-ground tanks must meet the stringent California Air Resources Board, or CARB, vapor-tight standards. With all these unknowns, SWRCB's position is it's prudent to allocate 90% of those 3 mills for these three purposes. By allocating that 90% of the 3 mills, the remaining $4 million, approximate $4 million, is available for the school site account and the site cleanup sub-account, or I believe now the SCAB account. I'm working on it, Lisa. SCAB, though, I'm not quite sure I'm going to be able to handle that one. But in reviewing the history and existing budget of the schools account, as mentioned earlier, it appears there's sufficient holdover in that account for this year in the excess of about $11 million. So it probably doesn't really necessitate any money this year, again, being mentioned that this is an annual appropriation. But if a cushion is desired, approximately $1 million could go in to allocate for these purposes. That would leave approximately $3 million available for the new site cleanup sub-account. Examination of staff background, as indicated to me, was the alternative available funding sources are available. The $3 million could be used for low-cost, high-impact remediation or prevention efforts. Such funding clearly follows the legislative criteria established for use of this funding, and SWRCB would also recommend that sites which have paid into the UST fund account but are not eligible to submit for reimbursements through the standard program be given a certain level of priority under this new program. With that, I'd like to thank the State Water Board staff and the Division of Financial Assistance staff, many of which are sitting in the first 2 rows, for allowing us to attend these meetings, to allow us to be able to present our opinions and our thoughts on it. And we do all appreciate the significant efforts by staff in bringing the necessary context for this initial allocation recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian Padilla, Coalition for Adequate School Housing, followed by Susan Garner with Hydrologic.
Madam Chair and members, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I'm Ian Padilla with the Coalition for Adequate School Housing. We've been around since 1980, and our business is building and renovating schools, bonds, and so on. We have worked with the Water Board on a variety of occasions and programs. The 3 Water Board permits all had educational impacts, and so we've worked with you on that. Also, CASH was a co-sponsor of AB 120, which improved the process for school districts to apply to the UST program, and that was approved, signed, and it's very good news. Most recently, we are working with Water Board staff on the DROPS program, the Conservation for Schools, that came